My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's department has told Senate estimates that the decision to delay the national emergency declaration following recent record-breaking floods was a subjective and personal decision made by you, Prime Minister. How on earth can the Prime Minister justify delaying that decision for a full 9 days when the need was so clearly there and flood victims were so desperate for help?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Those opposite may not be aware, Mr Speaker. They may not be aware. They may not. They're not aware of a lot of things, Mr Speaker. They're not aware of how to put a budget together for a start, Mr Speaker, amongst many other things. But they may not be aware, Mr Speaker, that the first response of the government in relation to all of these issues was to get the support there immediately. To get it there immediately, Mr Speaker. Now, the Leader of the Opposition interjects. The Leader of the Opposition interjects with, "Oh yeah, Mr Speaker." Well, I'd like him to go and speak to the chopper pilot from the ADF, Mr Speaker, and tell him, as he was winching people off roofs, Mr Speaker, and describe his efforts on that day as, "Oh yeah, Mr Speaker." I'd like him to tell them that, Mr Speaker. I'd like him to tell them that.
Members on my left.
Because what we've seen from this Leader of the Labor Party over the last 3.5 years, Mr Speaker, this is taking your interjection.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. Goes to relevance. The question wasn't about me. If it was, I'm quite happy to have a debate about the fact that I spoke to the flood victims, unlike you.
The Prime Minister is relevant to the question, and I return him to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The opposition leader wishes to interject, Mr Speaker, then he should expect me to respond, Mr Speaker. He should expect me to respond, and I will, Mr Speaker. I will, because when I was in Lismore, Mr Speaker, I was in the dairy farms, I was in people's homes, I was in their businesses, I was there with the leadership of the councils and their officers to ensure that the support we've provided has been timely and targeted, and it was been welcomed by the Mayor of Lismore again today, Mr Speaker, as it was by the Mayor of Ballina when I met with the Mayor of Ballina, Mr Speaker. And so we will continue to provide that support. And that was the immediate response that was necessary to get the financial support in place, to get the ADF there and supporting, Mr Speaker. And the matters that involved the state of emergency declaration, I consulted with both the Premier of New South Wales and the Premier of Queensland, Mr Speaker. The Premier of Queensland did not wish us to declare a state of emergency in Queensland. I listened to her and I took her advice, Mr Speaker. The Premier of New South Wales was happy to do that. The state of emergency declaration does not trigger payments. It does not trigger ADF involvement, Mr Speaker. It does not trigger either of those things. Mr Speaker, those two things are the things we did immediately. The state of emergency assists with the recovery works and the facilitation of the processing of recovery efforts after the flood event. If the Leader of the Opposition spent more time understanding responses rather than politicising them, Mr Speaker, as he has done through fire, through flood, through pandemic, through cyclone, Mr Speaker, this Leader of the Labor Party has politicised every natural disaster to his shame.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. I don't need to hear from you. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer?